Welcome back to Girl Same the podcast. I am your solo host today, Kaylee Judge. Michaela's not here. We've been having some technical issues, so we're going to do a solo episode. Before we get started, though, I wanted you guys to know that we are on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts, and we also have an Instagram. I know some of you guys probably don't know that. So you can follow us on Instagram. We'll post clips of our episodes and some other information on there as well. And then if you ever have a topic that you'd love us to cover, you're more than welcome to comment it there and follow along. But today we are talking about stewardship and more so about money when it comes to stewardship, as that's kind of my field of work. So hopefully I can bestow some wisdom to you all that I've learned in the field and through different exams and things that I've studied for. So let's get started. First up with stewardship, I want to talk about who's the owner of the things that we have, which if you are a Christian, this, of course, would be God. And it's God really if you're a Christian or not, but Christians believe that it is God who owns all things. And we get that in two different scripture verses that I pulled here. Psalm 24:1, which says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it." And then 1 Corinthians 10:26, "For the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof." So everything is God's, and this is repeated not just in those two verses, but throughout Scripture. And so it's a reminder to us of something that is pretty easy to forget, if we're being honest, that everything is His. He has dominion, and He is the creator of it. So everything that we have, ultimately, our possessions, our talents, opportunities, careers, relationships. I don't just want you to think of material things or the dollars in your bank account, but truly all things have been given to us to steward, and we are entrusted with those things for the short while that we're here on this earth. So we're not owners, but we're managers for God is another way to think about it. The heart behind stewardship, though, so it's kind of more the practical head knowledge. We understand that. But in a heart sense, this can be a little bit hard to apply or to really weave into our everyday life. I know a lot of times churches don't necessarily do the best job of talking about money, which is unfortunate, but a common verse that story that they'll tell is the parable of the talents, which is found in Matthew 25. If you're not familiar, the parable of the talents is a story about a master who is going on a journey, and he's leaving his servants with some of his assets, which are called talents back in the day. It's kind of a form of money you can think of. And there's 3 different servants, and they each get a different sum of money. When the master returns, he meets with each of the different servants to see what they did with the talents that he gave them. And to the ones who were fruitful with the talents and multiplied them, he said, which is in Matthew 25:23, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much." And although it might seem like the goal here is to accumulate, and God will keep blessing us financially and we'll keep getting more so that way we can have much, like that verse says, the verse really is not talking about accumulation to be rewarded with more money, but it's really a principle of character. And if we're stewarding what we've been given well, whether it's money, whether it's ability, whether it's a platform, perhaps you are really successful or you're leading a company and you have the opportunity to speak into people and you're stewarding kind of your sheep, I guess you can say, of your company. Are you being a good steward and a good shepherd in that way? So God's concerned not just with what you're accumulating, of course, you would probably assume that, but He's really concerned with who you are becoming as a follower of Him and a believer of Christ and the way that that walk is reflected in the things that you're doing. And then, like I said, much does not necessarily mean money. It could mean you've been faithful over little, you're going to now have more responsibility. You're going to have a greater impact of the kingdom. You are going to be entrusted with more. And although that might seem appealing to kind of be entrusted with more, or maybe you are given more assets from the Lord, there's a lot of stress that can come with that. Decisions become more complex. Things that you deal with become more complicated as more assets are involved, which seems counterintuitive. It's kind of a paradox. You'd think more money, more happiness, less stress. I think it's some song, more money, more problems. That's totally true. The more money that you have, the more things there are to consider, and the heavier weight that you can often feel as a steward of God's resources, because you know you've been entrusted with more. And so there'll be more expected at the end when, let's say, the master returns, and you have to present what you've done with those resources, and you want to hear that, well done, good and faithful servant. All right, so we've talked about kind of the head, believing that God owns it all, and that we are not owners, we are stewards, we are managers for a short period of time. We understand the heart behind it, why we're doing this, that we've been entrusted, but day to day, living it out, what are the different kind of financial areas that this can apply to? And a good way to think about it is in 5 different areas of life that our monies can be used. So spending our dollars to live, give, provide for debt or taxes, grow, or save. So those are good kind of buckets to think of in terms of where your dollars are flowing. So first we have live, so just the cost to be you. So good questions to ask yourself in this area are, what is your cost of living overall? Is it within your means? Are you living paycheck to paycheck? And what do your spending habits reflect about your values? Oftentimes, we can say that if you look at someone's checkbook, or I guess people don't have checkbooks anymore, if you look at someone's credit card statement or whatever it is, you can kind of see where their priorities are. That and their social calendar, of course, generally reflect where someone spends most of their time and their money, which often just shows what they value most in life. And then save. So saving can be for not just like an emergency fund, but for goals, for investing and different things like that. So thinking about what are your saving goals? Why are you accumulating? It's not bad to accumulate at all, or to be prudent and save up a nest egg, so one day you might be able to retire and volunteer more, or maybe you're saving up to give or for a goal that you have. None of that's bad, but we want to make sure that the goal itself of saving isn't to become rich. And then giving, so an assessment on your generosity. There's a lot that can be said in the generosity area. This is not necessarily an episode on giving itself. I know that there's plenty that could be said. Generosity, I would say, I wouldn't count this as something where you aim for 10%, which is generally the norm for what Christians think is the right thing to do. I would say, do an assessment of your giving. Determine, are you doing it out of joy? Are you doing it thoughtfully and with intention? Or are you doing it because the church keeps asking you for money and you're frustrated? Or are you doing it because if you didn't, you'd feel shame and guilt? So really the heart behind giving is what we should focus on here. I'm sure we can do another talk about tithing and the New Testament call to that versus the Old Testament 10%, where in the New Testament we learn more about the heart behind the gift, and that we must decide each individually in our hearts what to give and what that looks like for each of us. So do an assessment of your giving. If it's not 10%, please do not be hard on yourself. But I want you to spend time with the Lord and see what He has for you to give. I would honestly try to steer away from figuring out what percent He wants you to give, but rather figuring out if there's a cause that you're particularly passionate about that you feel like He's put on your heart, or an organization that you think is doing a great work for the Lord and reaching unreached people or reaching out for people in need. So giving can look like a little bit different of a financial audit than the rest of these categories. So just be gentle with yourself in that and try to take away the shame and guilt that often is associated with that category. And then grow for investments. Oh, wait, no, I talked about saving. So debt. Debt is the next one here. Debt is not a sin. So kind of similar to give, I guess. Let's take away the shame and guilt. Debt is not a sin. It's not called a sin in Scripture. However, it's not talked about very fondly. So what we like to say, and by we I mean at my company that I work at and in a lot of Christian circles of finance, that we should be prudent about debt, but not fearful of debt. So being prudent, what does that look like? Not racking up a big credit card balance, probably not buying a car or home that you cannot afford, and trying to keep your debt levels under control as best you can. If you've already gotten to a place where your debt is what you would maybe call out of control or really costing you a lot, either emotionally or financially, there's always ways we can get out of it, paying it off early, saving in other areas, eating at home and things like that, canceling subscriptions and things so that we can pay off debt sooner. But doing an assessment of your debt is important because it can reveal a few things to you. It can reveal some discontentment potentially. It can also just reveal that maybe you're not as educated financially as you should be. And that's okay. Oftentimes when we see people who have high levels of debt, either there can be a discontentment issue, but sometimes they made the best choice that they could at the time they made it with the information that they had available to them. And now you've grown and you have more knowledge and wisdom, and you reflect back and say, why did I do that? Well, because the younger version of you thought it was a good decision. Or maybe you rushed into it because you wanted something that you really couldn't afford. Either way, the reality is you're sitting with debt now, and there's plenty of things we can do to take the next step forward to continue to get out of it and start working down that road of being a wise steward. So don't beat yourself up about it, but see, why do you have debt? Do you have plans to accumulate more debt? And what's the reasoning and heart behind that? And then taxes, of course, is the other area which we have not as much control over. I know taxes a lot of times can make people upset, to say the least, that they have to pay them. But we do need to remember that we are told in Scripture to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's. And this is Jesus replying to some of the Pharisees who are trying to kind of trip him up in his theology. And back in one of the Gospels, I can't remember which one that was in. I think it was in Matthew as well. But the point here is that everything is God's. We are called to obey the authorities that God's put in place, so long as they're not asking us to do things that are against Scripture and against the Lord, of course. And taxes does not really go against the Bible. In fact, Jesus tells us to pay our taxes. The more taxes you pay, the more that God has blessed you with income. So we really should maybe do it joyfully, dare I say, because it means that you have had an income. You've had an ability to buy food and pay your rent or pay your mortgage. And so we should be grateful to some regard in that. Now, of course, you shouldn't be overpaying your taxes and things like that. We should still be wise. But paying taxes with hatred for the fact that you're doing them is maybe not the heart posture that we should have. So I think a good way to go about looking at these different areas is to create a pie chart. Go through your last couple months of expenses, or just do this ongoing, and categorize. Is this a living expense? Is this a giving dollar that I'm spending? Is this for debt, taxes, or growing, either cash growing or investment growing? And kind of make that pie chart. See how big each slice of the pie is, and then maybe reflect on if you want these slices and the sizes of those to change. I know a lot of people are pretty shocked when they do that and realize that the live category of their expenses is much larger, a slice of the pie, than they would have guessed or anticipated. So it can be kind of fun to make up your pie and think, oh, this is probably what the percentages are for each of those categories, and then to see the outcome of it. It can be really shocking. But I would say to use it as a guide, but not necessarily as a way to look down on yourself or think, oh, I can't believe I've let it get to this point of my spending, or let it get to this point of my debt service. But say, this is where I'm at. Here's what I want my pie to look like. What is something I can do this month? Something I can change right now to start working towards that. And as you've implemented little changes along the way, you'll see that your pie starts to shift. And as that happens, and as you start making those small changes and your pie starts shifting, you'll also notice that your heart starts shifting, and the things that you want and the status symbols that you try to achieve maybe aren't as important as they used to be, as you're learning to be content, is really what this is all about. And something to keep in mind too is that while we might think of a spending decision being today and now, and in a couple months I'm going to buy a car, we kind of compartmentalize these things. Really, all financial decisions are simultaneous. So that's also why it can be helpful to have the pie, because it really puts into perspective that although I'm spending at the start of the month and my rent goes out at the end of the month, or whatever it might be, it's all happening collectively, and all of it is a reflection of where we're at in our stewardship journey. All right, so I know I just kind of laid out a lot of information, but I did want to talk about just the reality of the world we live in and how difficult it can be to feel successful at being a wise steward. So I wanted to bring up this verse, 1 Timothy 6, 8 through 10. So I have this written out here so I don't mess it up. It says, "But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." So I know a lot of times the last part of these verses is quoted to be money is the root of all evil. But I want to read it again. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So it's not that money is the root of evil. It's that the love of money is the root of various kinds of evil, not all evil. So money itself is not evil. We need to get that out of our thinking. I know a lot of believers who have thought that or do think that. So money itself is not evil, but it can produce evil when it's the thing that we crave. So really it's the discontentment and the greed causing the love of money that is producing evil, which when you look into the world, I'm sure you can clearly see that people who are in pursuit of wealth and power really are what cause evil things to go on outside of the evil workings of Satan. And of course, that is what spurs on evil here. Not all evil, but some evil. So a good question we can ask is, how much is enough? And I would encourage you not to let culture sway your decision in how much is enough. Especially here in America, we have marketing and debt is super easy to get into, and everyone has the next designer thing and the next biggest house on the block and the new car and whatever it is. But I would say pray, sit down with the Lord, and decide for yourself, not based off of what culture is telling you. Decide for yourself and your family how much is enough. And this could be a dollar amount. This could be, we're going to live off of this much money, and everything we make above that we'll give away, or something like that. And it might turn into some big audacious goal that you have, which is amazing. But allowing culture to sway your contentment, to sway what you think is reasonable for you and the Lord in terms of your spending, I would steer clear of, because often that is what will lead to greed. It will lead to the love of money, and thus all kinds of evil. So our mindset as believers is a stewardship. So what is faithful for me to do with my dollars? What is faithful for me to do with my relationships, my skills and abilities, and my platform and career? Whereas the world's view is ownership, that more is better, that the next pay increase, that's when I'll be happy. The next job promotion, then I'll be successful. And so we really have to switch our mindset, because we are just surrounded by what the world believes about money. But really, God has a lot to say about this. So we should be turning to Him and to His wise counselors to help guide us in this. I do want to clarify, though, in case you were confused by this love of money and this need for more. Money is not wrong. It's not bad to have wealth, to be wealthy, to be a high income earner. None of that's evil or sinful. But the question is, what should I do with this? How can I steward this well? What is the Lord calling me to in this? And what is my heart behind this? Especially when it comes to pursuing higher income, especially when it comes to increasing your lifestyle. Ask yourself, what's the heart behind it? Is this really what God has for me, or is this just a sign of discontentment? And it could be what God has for you. There's nothing wrong with that. In buying the home that fits your family or the car that fits all your children. But pray about it first and seek discernment and peace from the Lord. So a few practical things here. So next steps, kind of as we can think of them. Pray and invite God into your finances. A lot of people do not have the Lord involved with their money. I've been there too, and it's easy, even once you have had the Lord in your finances, to slowly push Him out because it's super revealing. So invite God into your finances and into your stewardship journey. And then track where your dollars are going, like we talked about with the pie chart, and then create goals to guide the flow of your dollars. Not just a goal of, my goal is to have $1 million and then I'll be satisfied, or whatever it is, but real goals that, something that's personal to you. So it could be, my goal is to stop going to the nail salon and to learn how to paint my nails myself because it's an expensive habit. Or my goal is to invite my friends over and I'm going to cook for them so we're not eating out all the time, or things like that might impact your spending. The goal could be about saving, or you're going to start investing for the long term and start having a longer term perspective on things. So there's many ways you can take your goals. Make sure it's personal to you, though, and something that will really start helping you take the next step in your stewardship journey. And then set up a review for your finances to ensure that you stay on track. For your spending, this might look monthly, and for your goals, it could be every 6 to 12 months or something like that. But don't write them down in your goals notebook and then put it in your bookshelf and realize it was there 18 months later when you're dusting or something like that. So we want to make sure that we're staying on top of it, because it's an easy thing to put on autopilot and just pay your credit card bill every month and whatever it is, and automate your savings and things, and then kind of lose sight of what the purpose was, lose sight of where your heart is in it. So make sure you're keeping those check-ins scheduled. And if you're married or have a spouse, make sure you're doing it with your partner too, and that you're aligned in your goals and you're aligned in your vision, because that is super important in all of this too. We want unity with the Lord, and we want unity with our spouses. So in closing, stewardship is not so much about what you have, but it's about how you use what you have to be faithful. God's not looking for you to be perfect and for this certain math formula to come out of your pie chart and to look a certain way and for you to be giving to these specific organizations that he's going to reveal to you at some point. But he wants you to be pursuing him in this and being faithful to him in this. And then small, consistent decisions are what really make or break. So keep in mind, you think little thing here and a little thing there, they add up fast. And I want to leave you with this Bible verse, Matthew 6:21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.